For as long as I can remember, history has been told to us as if it belonged to a few chosen nations, as if progress began in one place and spread outward, while others waited to be discovered. But when I started looking deeper, I realized that what we call history is only a fraction of the truth. Black history is not confined to America's civil rights movement. It is a global story that has shaped cultures, economies, and societies across every corner of the world. It is a story written in the soil of Africa, carried across oceans, and echoed through the lives of people who refuse to be forgotten. When we talk about Black history, most people think of the 1960s, of marches, protests, and the long fight for justice in America. But this story began long before that, thousands of years before any modern nation existed. It began in the birthplace of humanity, where ancient civilizations thrived, where science, art, and spirituality flourished. Africa was not waiting to be civilized. It was teaching the world how to live. From the bustling trade routes of Timbuktu to the powerful empires of Mali, Kush, and Songhai, Africa's influence spread far beyond its shores. Explorers, scholars, and inventors shaped knowledge that still influences the modern world. Music, language, mathematics, navigation all carry traces of African genius. Yet, for centuries, that story has been hidden, rewritten, or erased, leaving generations to believe that greatness began elsewhere. Today, we are reclaiming that truth. We are telling the story of a people who have endured slavery, colonization, and injustice, and yet, through it all, continue to build, create, and inspire. From the Caribbean to Brazil, from Europe to Asia, Black communities have shaped the cultural heartbeat of humanity. Their music became the world's rhythm. Their art became the world's vision. Their resilience became a lesson in what it truly means to rise. This is not a story of pain alone. It is a story of brilliance and survival. It is about kings and queens, scientists and poets, leaders and dreamers, people whose legacies continue to shape our shared future. To understand world history, we must understand Black history, because they are one and the same. As we embark on this journey together, we will uncover the forgotten empires, the hidden connections, and the voices that time tried to silence. We will challenge what we think we know and rediscover what was always there, the undeniable truth that the story of Black history is, in fact, the story of us all. Before we begin, I invite you to be part of this mission, to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps bring these hidden stories to light and keeps history alive for those who never had the chance to see themselves in it. Together, we can rediscover the world's true past and, in doing so, reshape the future. When I think about where humanity truly began, my mind always returns to Africa, not as a distant or forgotten place, but as the very cradle of who we are. Scientific and genetic evidence tells us that every human being alive today carries the same ancient connection, a lineage that reaches back to this land where the first people walked beneath the same sun that still burns over its savannas. It was here, millions of years ago, that our earliest ancestors learned to shape stone into tools, to hunt together, to nurture fire, and to dream of something beyond survival. Africa was not just a birthplace. It was the first laboratory of human imagination. Over time, those early humans began to understand the world in ways that would forever define civilization. They learned how to read the sky, when to plant and when to harvest. Agriculture did not begin in isolation. It emerged from a deep relationship with the land, passed down through generations who studied patterns of rain, seasons, and soil. This knowledge created abundance, and from abundance came stability. Communities grew, families flourished, and slowly, villages evolved into societies governed by cooperation. Artistry, and belief. Long before recorded history elsewhere, these early Africans were building the foundations of what we now call civilization. They developed trade systems that connected tribes and regions, exchanging gold, salt, ivory, and ideas. They built networks that reached across deserts and rivers, connecting the interiors of Africa to the coasts and beyond. The first markets were not just places of commerce. They were meeting points of culture where language, art, and music intertwined with the rhythm of life itself. When we look at the ruins of ancient Africa, we see the traces of brilliance written in stone. In the valleys of the Nile, great kingdoms rose and thrived. Egypt, so often studied as a wonder of the ancient world, was one of many African achievements, a civilization of architects, mathematicians, and healers who mapped the stars and constructed monuments that still defy time. Southward, in Nubia, powerful dynasties flourished with their own culture and style, building pyramids and temples that rivaled their northern neighbors. To the west, the vast empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai emerged centuries later, proving that innovation and sophistication were not confined to one place but part of a continuous African legacy. I often imagine walking through Timbuktu at its height, a golden city of scholars and merchants, where books were traded as precious treasures, where students debated astronomy, philosophy, and law beneath the shade of clay walls. It was a place that connected Africa to the world, welcoming travelers from Arabia, Persia, and even as far as Europe. It is said that when Mansa Musa, the emperor of Mali, journeyed across the Sahara to Mecca, his caravan stretched as far as the eye could see, with so much gold that it altered economies along his path. These were not the acts of a continent waiting to be discovered. They were the signs of a world already thriving. Science now confirms what history once denied, that Africa was not only the birthplace of humanity, but also the birthplace of progress. Archaeologists have uncovered evidence of iron smelting, advanced metallurgy, and urban planning that predates many European cities. From the city of Great Zimbabwe, with its towering stone enclosures built without mortar, to the ancient trade ports along the Swahili coast that connected Africa to India and China, the continent pulsed with life, innovation, and purpose. These were not isolated pockets of greatness. They were parts of a vibrant network that spanned thousands of miles and countless generations. What fascinates me most is how this knowledge was shared, not through conquest, but through exchange. Early Africans were travelers and teachers, explorers of both land and spirit. They left behind languages, art, and technologies that became the foundation for many societies that followed. Even when later civilizations emerged elsewhere, the echoes of Africa's first brilliance remained. The science of irrigation, the art of storytelling, the harmony of rhythm all trace their roots back to that early spark of intelligence born under the African sky. But as centuries passed, much of this history faded beneath layers of distortion. Colonial narratives recast Africa as a land without history, ignoring the evidence written in Dina, in ancient architecture, and in the wisdom of oral tradition. The idea that civilization began elsewhere became a convenient myth, one that justified exploitation and denied recognition to the very people who first defined humanity's potential. Yet the truth endures, written in every fossil, every carving, every melody that still flows through the veins of African culture today. When I stand before ancient ruins or look at a map of human migration, I feel the gravity of that truth. Every step of progress, every invention, every revolution, every empire is a continuation of what began here. Africa's story is not a chapter at the beginning of human history. It is the foundation upon which all others rest. The first hands that shaped tools were African hands. The first words spoken, the first symbols drawn, the first fires lit, all were acts of creation born from this land. To understand who we are, we must return to that origin, not to romanticize it, but to recognize it as the shared inheritance of all humankind. When we say that life began in Africa, we are not just talking about genetics or geography. We are acknowledging that the first heartbeat of civilization came from here, that every culture, every nation, every story carries traces of that beginning. In remembering this, I find both humility and pride. Humility in knowing that our roots are deeper than any border or nation. Pride in realizing that the story of Africa is not separate from the story of the world, it is the story of the world. And though time and politics have tried to erase parts of it, the truth continues to rise, unshakable as the land itself, reminding us that long before others built cities and empires, Africa had already shown humanity what it meant to build a future. As I journey deeper into the story of Africa's past, I can almost see the rise of great empires that once defined the rhythm of the world. Names like Kush, Mali, Axum, Ghana, and Great Zimbabwe are more than lines in a history book. They are the echoes of civilizations that built, ruled, and inspired long before the modern world even began to take shape. These were not isolated kingdoms hidden behind deserts and jungles. They were centers of power, intellect, and spiritual depth that stretched their influence across continents, shaping trade, education, and faith in ways that still ripple through our lives today. In the lands south of Egypt, along the life-giving Nile, the kingdom of Kush rose like a golden flame. It stood as both neighbor and rival to the great pharaohs of Egypt, inheriting and transforming their knowledge into something distinctly its own. The Kushites mastered ironwork, architecture, and governance, and their queens called Kandakes ruled with wisdom and authority at a time when much of the world refused to see women as equals. Their pyramids still stand, smaller but more numerous than Egypt's, silent witnesses to an era when African royalty commanded armies, controlled trade routes, and corresponded with emperors across distant lands. In the heart of Kush, faith and state intertwined, and temples dedicated to gods of both Nubian and Egyptian origin reflected the continent's capacity for fusion and innovation. Centuries later, farther to the west, the Empire of Ghana emerged as the gatekeeper of gold. Its rulers controlled vast mines that supplied nearly half of the known world's precious metal. Traders from North Africa crossed the Sahara on camel caravans, their journeys stretching weeks and months, drawn by Ghana's wealth and stability. These routes did not just carry gold, they carried ideas, languages, and beliefs. Through them, Islam began to take root in West Africa, not through conquest but through conversation and respect. The exchange of salt, metal, textiles, and intellect transformed the region into one of the richest cultural crossroads on earth. From the foundations laid by Ghana rose the legendary Mali Empire, whose name still carries the shimmer of wealth and learning. When I close my eyes, I can almost picture Timbuktu at its height, its streets filled with scholars, merchants, and travelers from every corner of the known world. Within its libraries rested thousands of manuscripts on astronomy, mathematics, poetry, and law, written in Arabic and African scripts. It was a city that held knowledge as sacred as gold. Under Mansa Musa, the emperor whose pilgrimage to Mecca became the stuff of legend, Mali reached its golden age, when he passed through Cairo with his entourage of thousands. His generosity and the sheer quantity of gold he carried were said to have altered the value of currency for years. But beyond wealth, what made Mali extraordinary was its vision, its belief that education, faith, and governance could coexist in balance. Further east, in the highlands of present-day Ethiopia, the kingdom of Axum carved its own mark on history. It stood as one of the great powers of the ancient world, trading across the Red Sea with Arabia, India, and the Mediterranean. Its ports buzzed with life, where spices, ivory, and silk changed hands between cultures. Axum was also one of the earliest nations to embrace Christianity. Long before it spread across Europe, Its rulers built stone obelisks that soared into the sky and churches carved directly into the rock, monuments of devotion and artistry that still inspire awe. But perhaps Axum's greatest achievement was its openness. It welcomed people of many faiths, allowing Judaism, Christianity, and indigenous beliefs to coexist, proving that spiritual harmony could thrive alongside political strength. And then there was Great Zimbabwe, whose ruins rise in the rolling hills of southern Africa, a fortress of stone without mortar, its walls curving gracefully like waves frozen in time. For centuries, its very existence defied European imagination, for it seemed impossible that Africans could have built something so grand. Yet it was the heart of a complex trading network that stretched from the African interior to the coasts of the Indian Ocean. Gold, copper, and ivory flowed from its lands to the Swahili ports, where merchants from Arabia and Asia awaited their arrival. The architecture of Great Zimbabwe reflected both practicality and poetry, structures designed to endure, to protect, and to symbolize unity. Its people understood how to work with the land rather than against it, building an empire rooted in balance between human ambition and nature's rhythm. What strikes me most about these empires is how interconnected they were, not just within Africa but with the world beyond. While Europe struggled through its dark ages, African scholars debated the cosmos. While feudal lords fought over fragments of land, African emperors governed territories larger than most modern nations. These civilizations were not isolated, they were woven into the fabric of global history, influencing the flow of goods, beliefs, and innovation across continents. Trade linked them to the Mediterranean, the Middle East, and Asia. The gold of Mali gleamed in European coins. The iron of Kush strengthened weapons far beyond its borders. The faith nurtured in Axum traveled across seas and shaped spiritual traditions that endure to this day. And the architectural genius of Great Zimbabwe inspired generations to look again at what African hands could create. In these stories, I see not just power and prosperity, but purpose. These empires built societies that valued knowledge as much as wealth, harmony as much as might. They understood that trade was not only about goods, it was about connection. Education was not only about learning, it was about preserving wisdom for those yet to come. Religion was not only about ritual, it was about belonging to something greater than oneself. To walk through the remnants of these ancient cities is to walk through the blueprint of civilization itself. Their walls, carvings, and artifacts whisper of a time when Africa was not defined by what was taken from it, but by what it gave to the world. The empires of Kush, Mali, Axum, Ghana, and Great Zimbabwe remind us that history is not a single story, it is a tapestry of brilliance, resilience, and vision. And within that tapestry, Africa's threads shine among the brightest, connecting all of us to the roots of our shared humanity. As I trace the flow of history beyond the golden cities and thriving empires of Africa, I find myself following the roads that once connected this vast continent to the rest of the world. Long before European ships began carving new paths across the oceans, African merchants and the Moors had already built a web of trade and knowledge that stretched from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean, from the deserts of the Sahara to the bustling markets of Arabia and beyond. These connections were not born of conquest, but of curiosity, ambition, and an unshakable desire to exchange ideas. They carried not only gold and ivory, but science, art, and culture, the lifeblood of human progress, flowing freely across borders that barely existed in those days. It is easy to forget that the Sahara, now seen as a barrier, was once a bridge. Caravans of traders, their camels laden with salt, spices, books, and textiles, moved slowly across the endless sands. At night, they navigated by the stars, guided by an ancient knowledge of astronomy passed down through generations. These traders connected kingdoms like Mali and Ghana to North Africa and the Middle East, linking African wealth and wisdom to the heart of the Old World. In exchange for their goods, they brought back ideas, mathematics, philosophy, architecture, which would later spark revolutions of thought far from their homelands. The Moors, themselves descendants of African and Arab heritage, became the living proof of this exchange. When they crossed into Spain in the early 8th century, they carried with them the intellectual treasures of both Africa and the Islamic world. For nearly 8 centuries, they ruled parts of the Iberian Peninsula, turning cities like Córdoba, Granada, and Seville into centers of brilliance that would one day inspire the European Renaissance. In Córdoba, streets were lit by lamps when London and Paris still lay in darkness. Libraries held hundreds of thousands of manuscripts on medicine, astronomy, and engineering, many translated from Arabic texts that had preserved Greek and African knowledge long forgotten elsewhere. Scholars from across Europe traveled south to study there, returning home with the seeds of modern science and philosophy. When I walk through those ancient Moorish palaces today, I can still feel the echo of that golden age. The arches, carved with geometric precision, tell a story of minds that saw harmony between art and mathematics. Water flowed through intricate fountains not only as decoration, but as a symbol of purity and wisdom. It was in these spaces that African and Arab scientists developed the foundations of algebra, mapped the stars, and pioneered medical techniques centuries ahead of their time. The Moors did not just build cities. They built bridges between civilizations. But even beyond Spain, Africa's connections reached astonishingly far. On the eastern coast, the Swahili city-states flourished. Kilwa, Mombasa, Zanzibar, vibrant ports where African, Arab, Persian, and Indian merchants met. Their harbors shimmered with the sails of dhows, slender ships that rode the monsoon winds across the Indian Ocean. From these shores, African merchants traded gold from the interior, ironwork, ivory, and exotic woods in exchange for silk, spices, and ceramics. These cities were not passive recipients of influence. They were active participants in shaping global commerce and culture. The Swahili language itself is a living testament to that blending, a melody of African roots enriched by Arabic and Persian words, symbolizing a shared world born from exchange, not domination. The flow of knowledge along these routes was as valuable as the goods themselves. Scholars traveled alongside traders, spreading new ways of understanding the universe. African astronomers contributed to early star maps that guided sailors across the seas. Mathematicians and architects shared techniques that shaped the design of mosques and palaces from West Africa to the Middle East. Even musical instruments and rhythms traveled these same paths, weaving African sounds into the heartbeat of distant lands. It is remarkable to think that while much of Europe remained isolated, African merchants and the Moors were already global citizens. They understood that power did not come only from conquest, but from connection. They built societies where ideas moved as freely as gold, where faith and intellect could coexist, and where diversity was not feared but celebrated. Their cities stood as living mosaics of race, language, and belief, proof that civilization thrives not through walls, but through exchange. And yet, when later histories were written, these contributions were diminished, their influence obscured beneath narratives that sought to redefine who shaped the world. The truth, however, cannot be erased from the stones of Córdoba, from the coral walls of Swahili mosques, or from the genetic threads that tie continents together. The legacy of African merchants and the Moors lives in the very structure of modern science, art, and education. The Renaissance did not emerge in isolation. It was born from the sparks carried north by African and Moorish minds. I often imagine standing on a cliff overlooking the Strait of Gibraltar, where Africa and Europe nearly touch. The distance between the two continents is narrow, just a few miles of sea, yet that small stretch carried centuries of movement, trade, and transformation. Across those waters traveled not only goods, but ideas that would change the course of humanity. When the Moors brought libraries, universities, and architectural mastery to Europe, they carried the essence of Africa's ancient empires, the same curiosity that built Timbuktu, the same intellect that thrived in Kush and Axum. Through trade, scholarship, and faith, Africa became a silent architect of the modern world. It shaped languages, sciences, and systems of thought that still guide us. And though much of that story was later buried beneath the weight of colonization, the evidence remains, waiting to be seen in the maps, in the ruins, and in the continuity of culture that has never stopped flowing. To understand the world's progress, we must look back to the merchants who crossed deserts and seas, who believed that knowledge was worth more than gold. They proved that Africa was never isolated, it was always at the center, connecting humanity through ideas that would endure long after their names were forgotten. And as history comes full circle, their legacy reminds us that every great exchange, every moment of human advancement began not with separation, but with the courage to reach out and share. When I think about the story of human endurance, nothing echoes louder than the survival of African culture through the most devastating chapter of history, the transatlantic slave trade. It was an event that tore families apart, carried millions across vast oceans against their will, and sought to erase entire identities. Yet somehow, through centuries of unimaginable suffering, something miraculous happened. The human spirit, deeply rooted in African traditions, refused to. It traveled in whispers, in rhythm, in prayers, in the stories told beneath the stars. The legacy of Africa crossed oceans not as conquerors or merchants this time, but as captives who carried within them an entire world that could never be stolen. The trade itself was one of the largest forced migrations in human history. Ships filled with men, women, and children set sail from the coasts of West and Central Africa, bound for plantations in the Americas and the Caribbean. Many never survived the journey. Yet those who did carried fragments of their homeland's songs sung softly at night, recipes remembered from the villages they left behind, and languages whispered between people who shared no common tongue but shared pain and memory. Those fragments became the seeds of something new, taking root in strange soil and blooming into the foundations of entire cultures that still shape our world today. In the fields of the Caribbean, workers would sing in unison to ease their suffering. And those songs, born of both grief and resistance, evolved into the rhythms we now call blues, gospel, and eventually jazz. These forms of music were not merely entertainment, they were coded messages of hope, resilience, and identity. They spoke of freedom long before it was possible and reminded people that no chain could silence the beat of a people's heart. That heartbeat carried forward into reggae, samba, hip-hop, and beyond, influencing nearly every modern genre we know. Each drumbeat, each harmony, is a thread that connects us to those who refuse to forget who they were. But it was not just music that carried the soul of Africa across continents. Religion, too, became a vessel of endurance and transformation. While European colonizers imposed their own faiths, the people who were enslaved found ways to weave their ancestral beliefs into new forms of worship. In Haiti, Vodou blended African spiritual traditions with Catholic imagery, creating a belief system rooted in reverence for ancestors and nature. In Brazil, Candomblé preserved Yoruba deities under new names. Across the American South, the spirituals sung in praise houses echoed African call and response patterns, blending biblical imagery with ancient rhythms that had crossed the sea. Religion became both sanctuary and resistance, a way to hold on to the sacred when everything else was taken away. Even in the kitchen, African heritage found ways to survive and transform. Enslaved cooks introduced ingredients and techniques that reshaped global cuisine. Okra, boiled peas, rice cultivation, and the art of slow cooking carried flavors of the African continent into the Americas. Gumbo in Louisiana, jerk seasoning in Jamaica, and feijoada in Brazil all trace their roots back to African kitchens where recipes were not written down but remembered through touch, taste, and love. Every dish told a story, not just of survival but of cultural fusion, a testament that even in bondage, creativity and tradition endured. What is remarkable is that despite centuries of displacement, the cultural of Africa did not just endure. It thrived and transformed the societies that sought to erase it. The dance movements, storytelling traditions, and community structures all adapted to new lands, subtly influencing the development of language, art, and politics across continents. Today, we can see Africa's fingerprints everywhere, from the syncopated rhythms of Latin music to the communal spirit of Southern hospitality, from the bold patterns in modern fashion to the oral histories that continue to define communities worldwide. This legacy reminds me that culture is not something that can be fully destroyed. It bends. It adapts. It hides in plain sight until it is ready to rise again. The survival of African traditions through the slave trade is one of humanity's greatest acts of defiance. It is a story that proves the power of memory, creativity, and identity against even the most brutal attempts to erase them. Each generation carried the torch forward, sometimes without even realizing it, until the world began to rediscover what had been there all along: the African roots beneath global culture. When I look at the map today, I see a world connected not just by trade routes or borders but by shared heritage. The rhythms of Africa echo in Havana and New Orleans. The flavors of its kitchens enrich tables from Rio to Charleston, and its spiritual wisdom continues to inspire movements for justice and unity across the globe. The journey from the shores of Africa to the modern world is one of profound loss and extraordinary rebirth, a reminder that even when people are displaced, their essence, their art, and their truth will always find a way to return home. The story of the transatlantic slave trade is not just one of suffering, it is a story of transformation. Out of darkness came resilience, out of displacement came creativity, and out of brokenness came a cultural mosaic that reshaped the world. It is a living legacy, one that still moves in the rhythm of every drum beat, tastes in every shared meal, and shines in the stories that refuse to be forgotten. Freedom has always been the heartbeat of the human story, and nowhere was that pulse stronger than in the hearts of the enslaved who refused to surrender their humanity. Across continents and centuries, people of African descent carried that same defiant rhythm, the rhythm of rebellion, dignity, and hope. It was not only in one nation or under one flag. From Haiti's revolution to Brazil's quilombos, from the whispered routes of the Underground Railroad to hidden uprisings across the Caribbean and beyond, the fight for freedom was global. Each struggle, each act of defiance, was a declaration that no chain could silence the desire to live free. The story of Haiti stands as one of the most extraordinary moments in world history. It began with whispers among the enslaved, spreading through the sugarcane fields and mountain paths a belief that liberation was possible. In 1791, under the banner of unity and faith, they rose up, led by figures like Toussaint Louverture and Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who turned their pain into purpose and their oppression into revolution. Against impossible odds, they defeated not one but three European empires, France, Spain, and Britain, to establish the first Black Republic and the first independent nation born from a slave revolt. The Haitian Revolution did not just free a people. It shattered the illusion that slavery was inevitable. It became a beacon that inspired others, a warning to those who profited from bondage, and a testament to the unbreakable will of those who dared to dream of equality. But Haiti was not alone. Across the vast landscape of Brazil, where millions of Africans were brought over centuries, communities of escapees carved out sanctuaries in the wilderness. They called them quilombos, hidden settlements built by those who refused to live in chains. The most famous among them, Palmares, grew into a thriving society that lasted nearly a century. There, men and women farmed, traded, and governed themselves, protected by dense forests and their fierce unity. They were not merely survivors, they were builders of an alternative world, a living rejection of slavery's order. The spirit of quilombos endured long after their physical destruction, becoming a symbol of resilience that still resonates in Brazil's culture and identity today. And while revolutions raged in the tropics, another form of resistance took root in the shadows of North America. It was not an army or a single uprising, but a secret network of courage and compassion known as the Underground Railroad. It was not a railroad in the literal sense, but a chain of hidden routes and safe houses stretching from the American South to freedom in the North and beyond to Canada. The conductors were both black and white, free and enslaved, guided by faith and the North Star. Figures like Harriet Tubman became legends not because of force of arms, but because of unyielding bravery. Tubman herself made multiple journeys back into danger to lead others to safety, each time risking her life to ensure that others could breathe the air of liberty. The Underground Railroad showed that freedom was not a solitary pursuit, it was a collective act of trust, sacrifice, and humanity. Beyond these famous movements were countless smaller revolts, quiet, localized acts of rebellion that history often forgets but that carried the same fire. In Jamaica, leaders like Nanny of the Maroons led guerrilla wars that baffled European armies. In the American South, resistance took the form of work slowdowns, secret education, and the preservation of forbidden songs that kept memories alive. Across the Caribbean, uprisings erupted again and again, each one echoing the same unyielding truth. Freedom was not granted, it was taken, reclaimed, and defended with every breath. These movements were not isolated, they were connected by a shared understanding that dignity had no borders. Messages of rebellion spread through sailors, travelers, and stories passed from one plantation to another. An enslaved man in Brazil might have heard of Haiti's success and found strength in it, just as someone in Virginia might have heard whispers of freedom carried on the wind from the Caribbean. The network of resistance was global long before technology connected the world. It was built on human will and shared memory, crossing oceans and transcending languages. The fight for freedom also reshaped global politics. The Haitian Revolution terrified colonial powers, prompting reforms and accelerating debates about human rights and the abolition of slavery. In Brazil, the spirit of the quilombos influenced later movements for emancipation. In the United States, the Underground Railroad and the abolitionist movement laid the moral foundation for the Civil War and the eventual end of legal slavery. But even after emancipation, the struggle continued. Freedom had to be defended in new forms, against new systems of control. Still, the courage of those who came before had already changed the world's moral compass. As I trace these stories, I see not a series of disconnected rebellions but a single, continuous current of resistance. From the forests of Palmares to the fields of Haiti, from the hidden basements of abolitionists to the songs sung in secret at night, the same spirit burned, an unwavering belief in the right to live with dignity. That spirit did not end with the revolutions. It carried forward into civil rights movements, independence struggles, and modern calls for justice around the globe. The legacy of these fighters is not one of bitterness but of strength. They proved that no matter how powerful oppression seemed, the human spirit could imagine and create freedom even in its darkest hour. Their courage built the foundation for every modern struggle for equality, and their memory reminds us that liberty is not a gift, it is a birthright. The story of their fight is not a tale of tragedy, but of triumph, one that belongs not just to one people, but to all of humanity. When slavery officially ended, many believed that freedom had finally been won. But for those who carried generations of struggle within their blood, Liberation was not a finish line, it was only the beginning of another chapter. Chains could be broken, but the weight of injustice remained, reshaped into laws, policies, and unspoken barriers. The fight for equality had to evolve, moving from the plantations and ships of the past into the streets, schools, and courtrooms of the modern world. The same spirit that had carried the enslaved across oceans now found its voice in leaders, dreamers, and ordinary people who refused to let oppression define their future. In America, the echoes of resistance became a chorus led by figures like Martin Luther King Jr., a man who believed that freedom was not only a right but a moral obligation. His dream was not born in isolation, it was the continuation of a story that began centuries earlier, when the first African captives fought for their humanity. King's vision of nonviolent resistance drew from ancient philosophies and the unbroken courage of his ancestors. He marched through streets filled with hatred, faced imprisonment, and met violence with steadfast faith, all to awaken the conscience of a nation. His words spoken from pulpits and shouted in protests carried the same rhythm as those sung in the fields long before, the rhythm of hope that would not die. But the struggle was never confined to one country. Across the ocean, in South Africa, another man rose from the shadows of injustice: Nelson Mandela. He spent decades behind prison bars, yet his resolve never weakened. His body was confined, but his vision stretched beyond stone walls. Mandela's fight was the embodiment of endurance, a reflection of every person who had ever been told to wait for freedom. When he finally emerged, his message was not vengeance but reconciliation, a testament that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the power to forgive and rebuild. His leadership transformed not only a nation but also the world's understanding of justice. And while these names became symbols, countless others carried the struggle in quieter ways. In the mid-20th century, across the Atlantic, the Windrush generation arrived in Britain, men and women from the Caribbean who came to rebuild a nation recovering from war. They carried the optimism of a promised new beginning, yet found themselves confronting discrimination, exclusion, and the sting of being treated as outsiders in a land they had been taught to call home. But they did not yield. Through their labor, art, and activism, they reshaped British culture, infusing it with new rhythms, colors, and perspectives. Their presence challenged the world to redefine belonging and to see that identity was richer than borders could contain. The civil rights marches, the anti-apartheid protests, the labor movements, and the countless acts of resistance that filled the 20th century were not separate threads. They were woven together by a shared legacy that began in the villages of Africa, endured through the Middle Passage, survived the plantations, and found its voice in the modern age. Each generation built upon the sacrifices of the last, turning pain into progress and struggle into solidarity. The same message that once traveled through secret songs and coded prayers now echoed in speeches before thousands, broadcast across radios and television screens. The call for freedom had become universal. As the decades unfolded, this fight for justice expanded beyond race alone. The lessons learned through centuries of oppression inspired movements for women's rights, labor equality, and the protection of indigenous peoples. Activists from all backgrounds found courage in the legacy of those who had defied the impossible. The civil rights struggle showed the world that dignity could not be legislated, it had to be lived, demanded, and defended. From the sit-ins in Greensboro to the defiant marches in Selma, from the boycotts in Johannesburg to the quiet resilience of Caribbean immigrants in London, each act of defiance was a torch passed forward. Even today, the resonance of those battles continues to shape the world. Every protest for fairness, every demand for inclusion, carries within it the echoes of those who stood before. When modern movements raise their voices for equality, whether for racial justice, gender rights, or freedom from oppression, they are walking the same path carved by generations who refused to surrender their humanity. The world that King Mandela and the Windrush pioneers envisioned is still being built, brick by brick, through education, empathy, and the refusal to forget. As I reflect on this journey from the empires that once flourished in Africa, to the struggles of the enslaved, to the revolutions that shook the world, it becomes clear that Black history is not a separate story. It is the foundation upon which much of our shared humanity stands. The resilience that carried people through centuries of injustice did not end with emancipation. It evolved, finding new forms in art, activism, and leadership. It became the soul of global movements for justice, teaching the world that true freedom is not given by decree but earned through courage and unity. The lives of King Mandela and the Windrush generation remind us that liberation is not a single moment in time but an ongoing act of creation. It lives in every heart that refuses to accept inequality as normal, in every voice that speaks truth to power, in every young person who dreams of a world where no one is judged by their origin or the color of their skin. The journey is far from over, but the path has been illuminated by those who came before. Their footsteps mark the way forward, a path of endurance, compassion, and faith in a future where freedom is shared by all. As I reach the end of this journey through time, I am reminded that Black history is not something buried in the past. It lives, breathes, and moves within everything that shapes our world today. From the ancient empires that laid the foundations of civilization, to the revolutions that redefined freedom, and the modern movements that continue to demand justice, the story of Black people has always been the story of humanity itself. It is a story of creativity born from struggle, innovation forged in resilience, and culture that has crossed every border to touch every life. Today, we see that influence everywhere, woven into the rhythm of the songs we sing, the clothes we wear, the games we cheer for, the technologies we use, and the causes we stand for. The heartbeat of Black creativity continues to inspire and elevate the modern world. In music, that rhythm began with the sorrowful cries of the blues and the hymns of hope sung in cotton fields, which evolved into jazz, reggae, rock, hip-hop, and beyond. These sounds have become the universal language of freedom, identity, and unity, bridging continents and generations. The power of rhythm and lyric gave voice to the voiceless, turning pain into poetry and struggle into art that still moves the world today. In fashion, Black designers and cultural trends have redefined style as an expression of pride and identity. From the bold patterns inspired by African textiles to the elegance of modern Black culture, creativity has always been a form of rebellion and self-love. The hairstyles, streetwear, and colors celebrated today are more than trends. They are symbols of survival and joy, of reclaiming heritage in a world that once tried to suppress it. Fashion has become a canvas where history meets innovation, where every thread tells a story of endurance and evolution. Sports, too, have carried the legacy of excellence and defiance. From the quiet dignity of Jackie Robinson breaking baseball's color barrier to the raised fists of Tommy Smith and John Carlos at the 1968 Olympics, and the fearless advocacy of athletes like Serena Williams and LeBron James, Black excellence in sports has never been just about winning. It has been about being seen, being heard, and demanding equality. Every record broken, every barrier shattered, is a reminder that greatness is not defined by opportunity alone, but by the determination to rise even when the odds are impossible. And in the realm of technology and innovation, new generations of Black thinkers, scientists, and entrepreneurs are shaping the future. From Garrett Morgan's traffic signal and Madam C. J. Walker's pioneering beauty empire to modern leaders in tech, art, and science, Black brilliance continues to drive progress forward. The world often forgets how much of what we use, where, and depend on today was born from the ingenuity of those who were once denied education and recognition. Yet, time and again, that same creativity has transformed adversity into advancement, proving that innovation thrives wherever there is imagination and courage. Beyond art and invention lies the heartbeat of activism. From the civil rights era to the present day, Black voices have called the world to conscience. Movements for justice, equality, and representation have inspired millions, sparking change that ripples far beyond race. These voices on the streets, in classrooms, in parliaments, and on global platforms remind us that progress is not passive, it is active, intentional, and rooted in compassion. Modern activism draws strength from the same energy that once powered revolts, revolutions, and marches for freedom. It continues to shape how we think about justice, fairness, and what it means to be truly human. When I look at the world today, I see how deeply Black history runs through it all. It is in the pulse of music, the rhythm of language, the art of movement, and the pursuit of innovation. It has shaped the moral and creative fabric of our global society. From Africa's ancient kingdoms to the streets of Harlem, from the classrooms of South Africa to the stages of London, from the courage of Mandela to the vision of King, every moment in this story has led us here to a world that still has much to learn, but so much more to celebrate. Black history is not a single narrative, it is the foundation of human history. A reminder that greatness often rises from struggle, and that resilience is the most powerful legacy of all. It teaches us that beauty, art, and innovation are born not in comfort, but in the unyielding pursuit of dignity and truth. The story continues today, carried by every artist who creates, every thinker who dreams, and every individual who believes in equality. The legacy of the past lives on in the brilliance of the present and the possibilities of the future. So as we close this chapter, let us not see it as an ending but as an invitation to listen more deeply, to learn more honestly, and to honor the voices that have shaped our world. Because the story of Black history is the story of us all, our shared journey through pain, progress, and purpose. Thank you for taking this journey with me. If this story moved you, if it opened your eyes or touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue to uncover the stories that matter, to celebrate the voices that history tried to silence, and to remind the world that knowledge, empathy, and unity are the true engines of progress. Together, let us keep history alive not just in books or documentaries, but in the way we live, learn, and create every single day.